The 2020s has seen many cultural trends playing out, especially due to the presence of online spaces and social media. And it's my personal belief, as is the belief of many others, that the 2030s will similarly also see many different such cultural trends playing out due to the presence of the internet and other external factors. To begin with this video, I highly credit to the YouTuber Medieval Mindset, who made two videos regarding the cultural trends that will play out in the 2020s and 2030s. I recommend to go watch his videos. But there are some thoughts that I thought I would add on and include as part of this broader thought of what may occur in the 2020s and the 2030s. So, I would first of all borrow from the postmodernist Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality. The idea that as we are progressing in society, especially within modern society, or what some may view as postmodern society, due to new technologies, especially the internet and social media that have arisen, but perhaps in Baudrillard's time this would have been the TV mainly, the television set, we are increasingly viewing more and more abstract versions of reality. And these more and more abstract versions of reality increasingly make it difficult for us to distinguish between what is, let's say, hyper reality and actual reality itself. And so what I have thought of kind of as a hunch really, and it's a possibility. I can't really prove it per se, but it's something that I've thought of that may be correct, is that the internet allows for certain trends, certain historical cycles and processes that would have normally played out over a century, let's say, or over a couple of decades. It allows these cycles and trends to play out within 1 or 2 decades. And mainly so, it allows certain intellectual and cultural trends to play out much faster than they normally would. This is primarily due to the nature of the internet, the mass spread of information across the globe, and how different opinions can reach from one end of the globe to another within a minute. And hence, it allows for the fast spread of opinions and information, and this allows for different kinds of cultures to become embedded within a generation. And then subsequently, when let's say a counterculture appears, it embeds itself again within the same generation. And you see, especially within Gen Z and the millennial generation as well, that the internet has allowed for many different trends to play out within one generation that you would have normally considered to have played out across 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 generations. So for example, you see at the beginning of the 2010s or before that even, especially during the millennial generation, the rise of the new atheist movement, which was centered around scientists and engineers and mathematicians, so centered around those who were specialized in the STEM subjects, who advocated for this kind of really aggressive atheism and their quite aggressive rejection of religion. In the 2010s as well, before the COVID era, you had the kind of blue pill positivity movement is what I would call it, which was center-left leaning, and it was a movement predominantly consisting of the millennial generation, but it also was including the Gen Z generation as it was growing up. And then after COVID, there's been a kind of break in the culture where you've seen the rise of right-wing ideology, you've seen the return of religion to the mainstream, and also the rise of what some may say is the red pill counterculture, or the new neo-masculinity movements, the new traditionalist movements that have arisen, especially within the last few years. And these are, of course, what you could term a reaction to, let's say, the blue pill culture, but even the red pill neo-masculinity culture itself is breaking down. And in the next few years, I don't believe it will be a very powerful force at all, mainly because, many of these online movements tend to fizzle out after a few years. The new atheist movement has lost a lot of the traction and steam that it had a few years ago. I imagine the same thing will happen to the red pill movement. So these kinds of cultural trends play out very quickly due to the nature of the internet and due to the nature of online spaces. And so I believe similarly, a lot of these trends that will play out are going to happen. What really would play out over a century or many decades are playing out in a matter of 1 or 2 generations, really. And so this is the example that I would give for the 2020s or 2030s, or rather the framework to understand the 2020s and 2030s. Again, a lot of the things that I'm going to say here are hypothetical, purely theoretical, and really and truly saying what's going to happen in the future is kind of like betting against God as a metaphorical term to use here, because you don't know what's going to happen ultimately. There's an infinite number of historical processes that can change the course of what's going to happen in the future. But if I were to bet, then I would imagine the 2030s to be a renaissance for the humanities. And this would be in opposition to the 2020s, which I would term as the era of the digital town square. The digital town square essentially conveys the concept that online spaces have become the equivalent of the medieval town square. And it's symbolic for the fact that there's been a return of this kind of medieval hearsay oral culture, where there's a kind of anti-intellectual slant amongst many of, let's say the millennials and Gen Z, especially on online circles. There's been a kind of growing anti-intellectualism of sorts. And it partially involves the return of this kind of oral hearsay culture. And you can see this in the rise of certain conspiratorial circles, or in the rise of very simplistic, populist kind of political movements. And these lead to very unnuanced conversations about political discourse. These lead to incredibly generalizing narratives that often come at the cost of attacking certain groups of people, and it leads to the polarization and radicalization of discourse. An important example actually of this is the recent phenomena of AI political slop, or political propaganda as AI slop, where you see certain groups being attacked or certain groups being made fun of through these kinds of, AI generated political videos. And that's just really a microcosm for what I'm talking about in this kind of digital town square, where this kind of medieval hearsay about different groups of people or supposed stereotypes or supposed things that they do is prevalent more so than actual informed opinions. And I imagine the 2030s then, going into the 2030s, we'll see a humanistic renaissance, a revival of the humanities, and a sort of spiritual, holistic view of man. It will partially reject certain principles of the dominant materialist paradigm that has been present in much of modernity, I believe, and it will also involve a rejection of the post-World War II consensus order. And it will be a few things which I believe will occur within this movement and I believe will manifest themselves. It will perhaps most likely be a very spiritual movement, and it will view the human being as a holistic, organic whole which has a relationship to everything around him, to his society. In response to the atomization of society and increasing levels of loneliness, network-based solutions may be provided to help solve these issues, which again returns back to viewing man as an organic, spiritual, holistic being. And I don't necessarily know if organized religion will play a big role. I'm not sure, because I'm not particularly sure whether, a lot of Gen Z will be overly religious, at least in the very ritualistic sense, or adhering very strictly to an organized religion. I do see a kind of religious spiritual ethos amongst a lot of young people today, but I'm not sure if that will translate into strict following of an organized religion, or if that will play an increasing role in the public sphere especially. But I do imagine a more spiritual movement which would believe in some kind of creator or divine being. It will partially be a rejection, or a reaction rather, to the new atheist movement, which emphasized the study of the natural sciences and of mathematics and engineering, essentially the STEM subjects, and rejected sort of religion very aggressively. As such, I believe this new humanistic renaissance movement, so to speak, will be one which emphasizes the humanities. On a more broad level, this revival and emphasis of and on the humanities will be a rejection of a lot of the kind of scientific and materialist, especially modes of thinking within our current institutions, but it will also be a rejection of many of the dominant economic models and political models that we use today. Hence, there may be a rejection of viewing the individual as a consumer unit, as this kind of atomized consumer unit in isolation from the rest of his society. Because in reality, of course, we very much exist in this web of interconnectedness where we are connected to everything around us. We have a relationship to all things around us, including our family, our friends, our loved ones, the people in our society, even things like nature and the space around us, right? We inhabit this kind of organic relationship, and we are organic beings. We can't just view the individual as this isolated thing from everything and everyone else. And so I do believe that this kind of viewing people as organic wholes, as part of a greater thing, let's say, will become more prevalent. It won't be a rejection of individualism per se or of individual autonomy, but it will stress the importance of relationships and networks as being a provider for human fulfillment and happiness. And I do see amongst both the right and left today, especially amongst Gen Z, whatever part of the political spectrum they are on, they are increasingly rejecting this notion of the individual as an isolated consumer unit. The right is becoming increasingly nationalistic and is viewing things in terms of these identity politics. Funnily enough, that might actually be a reaction to the past few decades, which have tended to view man as a kind of economic unit, not part of a greater organic whole or group, or like a kind of identity group. And on the left, obviously, the left by nature is quite collectivist and has also dipped its foot into identity politics. So in that regards, I do view that there will be a rejection of the individual as an isolated, atomized consumer economic unit, and more so to view man as an organic whole again, which is my sincere belief that this movement will bring about this notion and make it popular within society. And this will influence our economic and political models about how society should be run. Alongside that, obviously, there will be an emphasis on the humanities, kind of spirituality inherent to the movement. But most importantly, it will without a doubt be a reaction to the past decades where many movements or our dominant political and economic models have emphasized this kind of materialist approach. And it will without a doubt, I believe, be a rejection of that. At the end of the day, of course, much of what I am discussing is very much hypothetical and we cannot know for sure. But if I was to suggest what will arise in the next few years in terms of a movement really that will be popular amongst this generation and the next generation, I believe it will be such a movement.